Before canning revolutionized the way we eat, people relied on wild plants, preserved meats, and simple grains. I bet you don't even realize how canned food transformed our lives. So allow me to guide you through foods that kept Americans alive before canned food existed. Long before non-stick pans and prepackaged bread mixes, survival meant baking with what you had, wherever you were, even if that meant directly in the ashes of a fire. Ash cakes, a flatbread made primarily from cornmeal and water, were a culinary cornerstone for Native Americans and settlers alike. The idea was, keep it simple, portable, and filling, because when you're on the move, you don't have time to preheat an oven. Cornmeal, the main ingredient, was widely available thanks to the cultivation of maize by indigenous peoples. Easy to grow, harvest, and store, cornmeal became a staple ingredient across early America. Ash cakes required no fancy kitchen gadgets, just a fire and some ingenuity. They were baked directly in hot ashes, which might sound like a recipe for disaster, but the outer layer of ash actually helped insulate the dough and prevent burning. These humble cakes were rich in carbohydrates and provided crucial energy during long treks or grueling workdays. However, they weren't exactly gourmet. Biting into one might leave you crunching on stray ash, a reminder that survival came with a side of grit. In a time when grocery stores weren't an option, survival often meant turning to the land for sustenance, and sometimes the solutions were right beneath your feet. Ground nuts, a type of wild legume native to North America, became a critical food source for indigenous peoples and early settlers. These small, protein-packed tubers, also known as Apios americana, were foraged along rivers and wetlands, then transformed into hearty dishes like groundnut soup. Simple, nutritious, and surprisingly versatile, it was the kind of meal that made up for what it lacked in glamour with sheer practicality. Groundnuts thrived in poor soil and could be stored in their natural state for weeks, making them a reliable fallback during harsh winters or lean growing seasons. When cooked into a soup, they offered both warmth and sustenance, packing in protein, fiber, and key minerals. For people who needed to work hard to survive, this was as close to a superfood as it got. But don't romanticize the process too much. Gathering and preparing groundnuts was no easy task. Foraging required patience, and boiling them to remove bitterness tested even the most determined cooks. Hidden in the forests of early America was a fruit so unique it could have been mistaken for a tropical import. The pawpaw, native to the eastern United States, was a wild gem treasured by indigenous peoples and settlers alike. Its creamy, custard-like flesh tasted like a blend of banana and mango, but don't let the exotic flavor fool you. It was as American as apple pie. Pawpaw pudding became a popular way to showcase this forage delicacy, transforming it into a rich dessert that made tough times a little sweeter. Pawpaws were free for the taking, but they came with a catch. They ripen quickly and spoil even faster. This meant preservation was nearly impossible, making pawpaw pudding a seasonal treat. Settlers would gather the fruit during its short harvest window, mashing it into a pulp and mixing it with staples like cornmeal, milk, and eggs for baking. The result was a pudding that was as comforting as it was creative, a little luxury in an otherwise austere diet. While pawpaws were a nutritional powerhouse, packed with vitamins and minerals, the fruit required careful handling. Bruise it, and you'd have a mess on your hands, literally. Still, this wild fruit-turned dessert became a beloved tradition, proving that even in the wilderness, there was room for indulgence. When summer heat bore down on farmers in the 18th and 19th centuries, they turned to a surprisingly simple drink to keep going. Known as Switchel, or haymaker's punch, this tangy, slightly sweet beverage was the Gatorade of its time. Long before energy drinks came in aluminum cans, Switchel offered hydration and a quick dose of electrolytes to workers in the fields. Its ingredients were humble but effective: water, vinegar, molasses or maple syrup, and ginger. Together, they created a drink that was as refreshing as it was restorative. The beauty of Switchel lay in its accessibility. Every ingredient was easy to source, even for struggling farmers. Vinegar, often homemade, was a staple in most households, and molasses was an affordable sweetener compared to refined sugar. Fresh ginger might have been trickier to come by in some regions, but dried or powdered versions could be substituted, proving that necessity truly is the mother of invention. Nutritionally, Switchel was more than a thirst quencher. The vinegar provided potassium, the molasses added iron, and ginger soothed the stomach. As practical as it was, this wasn't a drink of luxury. It lacked the fizz of modern sodas or the elegance of iced tea, but what it lacked in sophistication, it made up for in down-to-earth resilience. In the days when tools doubled as cookware, a simple flatbread became a staple for pioneers and enslaved people alike. Hoecake, named for the garden hoe it was traditionally cooked on, embodies practicality at its finest. A mixture of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, this humble bread was both quick to make and filling. It was the perfect companion for those with limited resources and even less time. And yes, they really did cook it on a hoe over an open fire. Talk about multitasking. Cornmeal, the main ingredient, was abundant and affordable, making it a cornerstone of American diets in the 18th and 19th centuries. Corn didn't require refrigeration, and a sack of meal could last for months if kept dry. Unlike wheat flour, which was more expensive and prone to pests, cornmeal was durable and versatile. Hoecakes could be whipped up in minutes, whether on a farm, at a campsite, or beside a battlefield. Culturally, Hoecakes were a symbol of endurance. Enslaved communities relied on them as a cheap, energy-rich food, while soldiers in the Revolutionary War used them as portable sustenance. When faced with scarcity, people have a knack for turning what others might discard into something remarkable. Enter Souse, a dish born from necessity and ingenuity. Made from pig's feet, ears, and other head parts, Souse was a practical solution in a time when wasting food wasn't an option. To create Souse, the pig parts were boiled to extract gelatin, then seasoned with vinegar, salt, and spices before being pressed into a jellied loaf. This technique preserved the meat for longer periods in an era before refrigeration and canning existed. Vinegar acted as a natural preservative, ensuring the dish could be stored and transported. With a shelf life like that, Souse was an early pioneer in the grab-and-go meal category. Culturally, Souse was a staple among rural families, particularly in the South and Appalachia, where food preservation was vital for survival. Nutritionally, it was a surprising powerhouse, rich in protein, collagen, and calcium. But let's not sugarcoat it. Making Souse was messy, requiring patience and a strong stomach, yet resourcefulness triumphed, turning scraps into sustenance. Colonial America wasn't exactly brimming with culinary variety, but when European settlers adapted Native American ingredients, some delicious traditions emerged. Indian pudding is a prime example, a slow-cooked cornmeal-based dessert that's as rich in history as it is in flavor. It's a dish that melds old-world techniques with new-world resources, creating something entirely its own. The settlers had to get creative when wheat flour and traditional sweeteners like sugar were in short supply. Cornmeal, introduced to them by indigenous peoples, became a staple. Molasses, a byproduct of the burgeoning sugar trade, added sweetness and depth. Together with milk, spices like cinnamon and ginger, and a lot of patience, these humble ingredients were transformed into a pudding baked for hours. The aroma alone could probably convert even the most skeptical palate. This dish was a real symbol of adaptability. Cornmeal, unlike wheat, was plentiful and stored well, making it ideal for tough winters. Indian pudding was also nutritionally dense, offering carbs, fats, and some protein to sustain families through the lean months. In the kitchens of the American South, where resourcefulness reigned supreme, nothing went to waste, especially not pot liquor, the nutrient-rich broth left behind after cooking greens like collards or turnip greens. This flavorful liquid, often overlooked today, became the star of a humble but ingenious creation: pot liquor biscuits. For families with limited resources, every drop of nutrition counted. Pot liquor, infused with vitamins, minerals, and the smoky essence of cured pork, was far too valuable to discard. So instead of plain water or milk, it became the liquid base for biscuit dough, enriching a simple staple with added flavor and sustenance. The result was biscuits with a story baked into every crumb, a testament to ingenuity and survival. While the ingredients were basic, flour, pot liquor, fat, and perhaps a pinch of salt, the biscuits carried the weight of history. Greens were a cornerstone of Southern diets, cultivated in small gardens or foraged from the wild, and pot liquor was their flavorful legacy. Pairing it with biscuits turned this broth into a meal, stretching resources without sacrificing taste. It's said that Southern cooks considered pot liquor liquid gold, and they weren't wrong. In an era when food waste wasn't an option, these biscuits embodied the art of making something extraordinary out of the ordinary. In the 18th and 19th centuries, when winter meant months of limited food options, preserving vegetables was a matter of survival. String beans, a staple crop, were transformed into leather britches by a method that's as resourceful as it is simple. The beans were strung up on twine and left to dry in the sun, turning them into long, leathery strips that could be rehydrated and cooked when needed. With no refrigeration and long winters ahead, communities had to ensure they had a stockpile of nutritious food. The dried beans, once rehydrated, could be stewed with pork fat or whatever meat was available, creating a flavorful and hearty dish. While not glamorous, leather britches were an efficient and effective solution. Culturally, they symbolize the ingenuity and resilience of the pioneer spirit. Farmers, often with limited resources, knew how to make every crop stretch. Leather britches weren't just a food, they were a survival tool. Beans, readily available in the summer, could be stored for months, ensuring families had something to eat when fresh produce was scarce. The true value of leather britches wasn't just in the beans, but in the resourcefulness they represented, a testament to making the most out of what you had. In the rural South, nothing says comfort food quite like cornbread, except when it's loaded with cracklins. These crispy bits of fried pork skin not only add flavor but also represent a deep connection to resourcefulness during tough times. Cracklin cornbread was born out of necessity, created by farmers and settlers who used every part of the hog to ensure nothing went to waste. The cracklins, the byproduct of rendering pork fat, were mixed into cornbread for added texture, fat, and flavor. Simple ingredients like cornmeal, buttermilk, and the coveted cracklins were staples in Southern pantries. But what really made this dish special was how it could stretch a meal, providing nourishment and filling bellies during long days of labor. With no refrigeration, pork fat was often used for preservation, and cornbread could be baked in large batches to last for days, making it both practical and economical. Culturally, cracklin cornbread holds a place in Southern culinary tradition, often served alongside beans, greens, or a hearty stew. It symbolizes a time when every part of the animal was used and no meal was complete without a little indulgence in crispy pork fat. For centuries, corn has been a cornerstone of American cuisine, and one of its earliest forms of preservation was parching. Pioneers and Native Americans alike would dry and roast corn kernels to make them last longer during harsh winters or long trips. This method, simple yet effective, allowed people to carry lightweight, nutrient-dense food that could be eaten on the go. To make parched corn, you only need 2 ingredients: corn and heat. The kernels would be roasted until they were golden and crunchy, a process that preserved the corn's nutrients and energy while making it easy to transport. The result was a snack that could be carried in a pouch or woven into a bag, perfect for travelers, soldiers, and settlers in need of sustenance. In terms of nutrition, parched corn was a powerhouse. Packed with carbohydrates, fiber, and essential fats, it provided the energy needed to power through physically demanding tasks like farming or trekking across unknown territory. But parching wasn't without its challenges. The corn had to be carefully roasted to avoid burning, and the preservation process relied on the availability of fresh, healthy corn. In the days before refrigerators, it was all about making what you had last. Mutton, or sheep meat, was often the go-to protein for homesteaders and farmers because it was readily available and could be produced in abundance. Whether it was from a flock you raised yourself or a neighbor's, the meat was versatile, hearty, and perfect for long simmering stews. The ingredients were simple: mutton, root vegetables like carrots and potatoes, and sometimes barley. On the frontier, preservation methods were key, and mutton was often smoked, salted, or dried to extend its shelf life. When fresh, it was cooked in a stew pot, creating a nourishing, filling meal that could feed a family through tough times. The slow cooking process helped tenderize the meat, ensuring even tougher cuts were palatable and satisfying. What made mutton stew truly significant was its cultural impact. It represented resourcefulness, the ability to make do with what was available, and the endurance of pioneers who needed to sustain themselves through long winters. Plus, it was cheap. It wasn't fancy, but it kept people fed and fueled for the day's work. The stew provided much-needed protein and energy, a comfort food in a time when life often demanded hard work and resilience. For early settlers in rural communities, nothing went to waste, especially when it came to hogs. Hog's head cheese was born out of necessity and practicality, utilizing parts of the pig that might otherwise be discarded. While it's technically a terrine, it's not cheese at all, but a savory, jellied loaf made from boiled pig's head, ears, and sometimes trotters. The ingredients were humble: pork, vinegar, spices, and whatever else could be found on hand. These cuts of meat, rich in collagen, gave the dish its unique texture and flavor. Back then, preservation was everything. Whether it was smoked, salted, or chilled, hog's head cheese had staying power. It could last for weeks without refrigeration, an essential quality in the pre-canning days. Culturally, it was a dish that spoke to resourcefulness. It was food for those who had to make every scrap count, and it carried significance across various regions, especially in the South. Whether served cold on crackers or eaten as a filling for sandwiches, it provided nourishment that could stretch a meal. But beyond its practicality, it was also a symbol of ingenuity. It wasn't fancy or glamorous, but it was a lifeline. Native Americans were the original survival experts, foraging and preparing meals that could sustain them in even the harshest conditions. One plant they turned to was the Indian turnip, also known as Jack in the Pulpit. This root, easily recognizable by its unique flower structure, was a versatile food source, though it wasn't always the easiest to prepare. The plant contains toxins that must be carefully removed before it can be eaten. This involved either drying or boiling it multiple times to render it safe. It wasn't exactly a pop it in the pot and go kind of vegetable. But with the right preparation, it became an excellent starchy base for soups, stews, or even roasted on a fire. While it wasn't something you could stock up on like potatoes, its seasonal availability made it a crucial part of the indigenous diet. The plant's nutritional value came from its carbohydrates, which provided energy for those long days spent hunting and gathering. It was also an important protein supplement when other food sources were scarce. Culturally, the Indian turnip was both a staple and a symbol of survival. It taught early settlers and indigenous peoples the value of resourcefulness, how to make use of nature's hidden treasures. Long before the days of refined sugar, people had to get creative when it came to sweetness. Enter maple sugar, a natural, flavorful treat made from the sap of maple trees. Native Americans were the first to perfect the art of maple syrup and sugar production. They would tap the trees in early spring, collecting sap, which was then boiled down until it turned into syrup. The real trick, however, was continuing to boil until the syrup crystallized into sugar. It wasn't a quick process, but the result was a potent sweetener that could be stored for months, long after the sap was gone. Maple sugar had the advantage of being locally available, unlike cane sugar, which had to be imported. Early settlers quickly adopted the method, and by the 18th century, it became a major industry in the northeastern US and Canada. It was a valuable resource, particularly in places where other sweeteners were hard to come by. The challenges of tapping trees and boiling the sap were labor-intensive, but the reward was worth it. Today, maple sugar might be a niche product, but for centuries, it was a sweet, vital part of life. In the early days of American settlement, nature's bounty was both a blessing and a challenge. The nannyberry tree, a small fruit-bearing shrub, became a valuable source of sustenance during hard times. Native to North America, the nannyberry's small, dark purple fruits were often foraged and turned into porridge, a hearty and filling dish. The fruit was not only easy to gather but was available in late summer, making it a vital source of nutrition when other foods were scarce. The porridge itself was simple, wild nannyberries mashed and mixed with grains like oats or cornmeal, sometimes sweetened with maple syrup if available. It was a resourceful way to get a nutritional boost, as the berries contained essential vitamins and antioxidants. Preservation wasn't as easy, though. In a time before refrigeration, preserving the berries required drying or canning, which meant a lot of work in the short fruit-bearing season. Though not a glamorous dish, nannyberry porridge represented survival. It was filling, cheap, and provided much-needed energy. For many early settlers and indigenous peoples, survival meant using whatever was available in nature. Watercress, a leafy green that grows in cool, fast-moving streams, was one such resource. It's been used for centuries, especially in Europe and North America, not only for its sharp, peppery flavor, but for its nutritional punch. Watercress soup became a popular dish when fresh greens were abundant in spring and summer, offering a source of vitamin C and essential minerals. Simple to prepare, watercress soup combined foraged greens with broth or milk, often seasoned with onions or garlic for flavor. The greens were widely available, but because they spoil quickly, preservation was tricky. For many, the solution was to dry the leaves for use in the winter months when fresh greens were hard to come by. Culturally, watercress soup had its place in rural and pioneer kitchens, representing both frugality and ingenuity. It was a dish born of necessity, yet it's packed with value, providing vital nutrients during lean seasons. For settlers, it was a reminder of the earth's hidden treasures and a sign that even humble ingredients could be transformed into something life-sustaining. When early settlers and Native Americans needed a reliable drink for sustenance, they turned to the rich, fatty nuts that grew on the hickory tree. Hickory nut milk was a clever solution, blending the nuts with water to create a creamy, high-calorie beverage. Not only did it taste great, but it offered a much-needed source of energy in a world where food wasn't always easy to come by. Harvesting hickory nuts was no small task. They had to be cracked open to get to the nut inside, which was a labor-intensive process. Once collected, the nuts were often ground into a paste or crushed and steeped in water to make the milk. To preserve it, settlers either drank it fresh or stored it in jars, hoping it would keep until they could use it. This nutrient-dense milk packed a punch. With plenty of healthy fats and a good dose of protein, it was ideal for long days of physical labor. It could also serve as a substitute for milk in cooking, adding a rich, nutty flavor to various dishes. While it wasn't always the easiest to make, hickory nut milk was an invaluable resource, representing the resourcefulness of those who used it. Long before store-bought desserts were the norm, early settlers had to get creative with what nature provided. Grape dumplings were one such innovation, born out of necessity and resourcefulness. Made by boiling dough dumplings in grape juice, they were a sweet, sticky treat that made the most of fresh seasonal fruit, especially in areas where wild grapes were abundant. Ingredients were simple but vital: flour, water, and whatever wild or cultivated grapes were on hand. The grapes provided not only sweetness, but also a dose of vitamins and antioxidants. In a time when processed sugar wasn't always available, fruit like grapes were a natural choice for sweetening dishes. Preservation was key. Grapes could be preserved as jams or dried, ensuring that the taste of summer lasted through the colder months. Though grape dumplings weren't a staple in every household, they were a beloved treat for those who could access fresh grapes. Their cultural significance lies in their embodiment of self-sufficiency, utilizing locally available ingredients for a nutritious, comforting dessert. In an era when making the most out of every resource was crucial, grape dumplings were the perfect example of how creativity could stretch both the seasons and the pantry. When persimmons ripen, they're the ultimate symbol of late autumn bounty. This fruit, often overlooked today, was once a key ingredient in kitchens across early America, particularly when making persimmon bread. The sweet, smooth pulp of the fruit was used to create a moist, flavorful loaf that became a practical way to preserve the harvest long after fresh persimmons had vanished from the trees. The ingredients were basic: flour, eggs, sugar, and a hefty amount of persimmon pulp. It was a great way to use up an abundant fruit harvest and stretch pantry supplies. In times before refrigeration, Preserving the fruit's sweetness through drying or canning was common. Canned persimmon pulp, like applesauce, could be used year-round in bread, pies, and more. Culturally, persimmon bread carried a homely warmth, especially in Appalachian regions. It was shared during cold evenings and served alongside a hot cup of tea or coffee. More than just a dessert, it represented the kind of food that kept people going through tough winters, nourishing, filling, and made from what could be grown or foraged. The Jerusalem artichoke, often confused with its distant relative, the globe artichoke, was a hidden gem in early American diets. Indigenous to North America, this knobby root vegetable was prized for its ability to thrive in poor soil and harsh climates, ideal for survival when farming conditions weren't always reliable. Despite its name, it has no connection to Jerusalem. The name likely evolved from the Italian word girasole, meaning sunflower, due to its sunflower-like blossoms. The artichoke's earthy, nutty flavor and its versatility made it a pantry staple. It could be roasted, boiled, mashed, or even made into soup. While fresh Jerusalem artichokes were enjoyed throughout the growing season, they were also stored for winter by either canning or drying the tubers. The tuber's natural sweetness was a prized feature, and with limited preservation methods, this food was an essential part of winter diets. Nutritionally, Jerusalem artichokes were packed with inulin, a carbohydrate that's good for gut health. Unlike many root vegetables, they have a low glycemic index, making them a valuable option for those watching their blood sugar. Of course, they also come with their share of challenges, mainly their tendency to cause gas if consumed in large quantities. Sweet potato pie, a beloved dessert that traces its roots back to the American South, has been warming kitchens for centuries. Though its exact origins are debated, it's believed that the sweet potato, native to the Americas, was first cultivated by indigenous peoples. The pie's widespread popularity grew when African enslaved people brought their culinary skills to the South, incorporating the starchy tuber into their dishes. The core ingredients of sweet potato pie are simple: sweet potatoes, sugar, butter, and spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. But its rich flavor makes it much more than the sum of its parts. It was an affordable dessert, made with ingredients that were widely available, even in the toughest times. It could be baked, stored for a few days, or shared at family gatherings, making it a practical choice for resourceful cooks. Sweet potato pie isn't just about taste. It also holds deep cultural significance. In African American communities, it became a symbol of family, togetherness, and tradition, particularly during the holidays. Nutritionally, sweet potatoes are rich in vitamins A and C, making the pie a healthier option compared to many other desserts. Once prized by early American settlers, ground cherries, small, papery shelled fruits related to tomatoes, made their way into kitchens as a sweet and tangy preserve. These tiny berries, also known as husk tomatoes, were a staple in colonial gardens due to their hardiness and the ease with which they grew. Early pioneers relied on these wild fruits to add flavor to their otherwise limited diets. Ground cherry jam, with its slightly tart and sweet flavor, quickly became a favorite treat. The fruit's availability, particularly during late summer, made it an affordable preserve for those looking to extend the harvest. Ground cherries can be turned into a variety of sweet spreads and jams, often mixed with sugar, pectin, and a touch of lemon juice to balance the natural tartness. Families would often stockpile jars of the jam as a vital addition to their winter meals. This jam offered not just a flavorful spread, but a much-needed source of vitamin C in an era when fresh fruits were harder to come by. While making jam may seem easy, the tiny size of the fruit posed a challenge. Harvesting and deshelling each ground cherry was a time-consuming task, but the end result, a jar of sweet and zesty jam, was worth every minute. In the days before canning, families had to get creative when it came to preserving food through the winter months. Root cellar stew emerged as a practical solution, utilizing vegetables and meats stored in cool, dark root cellars, nature's version of a modern-day freezer. A basic root cellar stew often featured potatoes, carrots, onions, and turnips, all of which were stored in a root cellar to stay fresh for months. A hearty mix of preserved meats, often dried or salted, added flavor and substance. These ingredients were cheap, accessible, and nutritious, ideal for feeding a family through lean times. Farmers had an abundance of root vegetables in the fall, which made this dish a natural choice for colder months. The secret to root cellar stew's long-lasting appeal lay in its simplicity and the preservation techniques available. The cool, stable temperature of a root cellar allowed vegetables to be kept without spoilage, while preserved meats added essential protein. Stews could be left simmering for hours, developing deep, savory flavors. This dish also provided key nutrients needed to stave off winter illnesses, making it both a practical and cultural staple. For centuries, wild rice porridge has been a staple in Native American diets, offering both sustenance and a deep connection to the land. Unlike cultivated rice, wild rice grows naturally in the shallow waters of lakes and rivers, primarily in the northern United States and Canada. It was traditionally harvested by hand, making it a labor-intensive crop, but one that was deeply valued for its nutritional content. Wild rice porridge was often made by simmering wild rice with water or milk, sometimes sweetened with maple syrup or honey for extra flavor. With its nutty taste and chewy texture, this dish was prized for its ability to keep people full during harsh winters. The rice itself was nutrient-rich, packed with protein, fiber, and essential minerals, making it both a practical and nourishing food source. Preservation was key, as wild rice could be dried for long-term storage, making it an essential ingredient during off-seasons. Indigenous peoples also utilized other seasonal ingredients like berries, nuts, and game to add variety to the porridge, stretching limited resources. Few dishes capture the spirit of thrift and indulgence quite like a warm, wilted lettuce salad. It's a combination that's both practical and unexpectedly decadent. A bed of fresh lettuce gently softened by a hot bacon fat dressing. If that doesn't sound like a love letter to resourcefulness, what does? This dish traces its roots back to rural American kitchens, where wasting food was unthinkable. When lettuce was abundant and bacon fat was too valuable to discard, clever cooks turned to this ingenious recipe. The heat from the dressing slightly wilts the greens, creating a tender, flavorful base. The addition of crumbled bacon, a splash of vinegar, and sometimes a sprinkle of sugar made it a savory, sweet masterpiece. The magic of this salad lies in its balance. It's humble yet rich, fresh yet comforting. It transformed humble greens into something hearty and satisfying, a rare feat for a salad in those days. Variations of this recipe can be found across different cultures, proving that the idea of combining warm fats with greens is truly universal. In a time when every resource counted, wilted lettuce salad turned a simple garden harvest into a dish worthy of the family table. If you go on over to central New York, specifically Utica, then you'll actually find an interesting bit of the local cuisine there known as chicken riggies. Tired of pastas? Give this one a shot. I promise it might turn your world upside down. This dish is entirely inspired by the Italian-American communities that are so dominant throughout Utica, and it's something that you can never go a day without seeing in upstate New York. The strong scent of hot peppers and chili flakes carries for miles, and it's that spice that people most strongly associate with a chicken riggie. This dish is pretty much named that entirely because it uses a lot of rigatoni pasta, which is the main star of the show here. It's made using chicken, cream, and all kinds of spices, and it even uses banana and cherry peppers. Come on, when's the last time you heard those names in a dish? I'll wait. Until you figure that one out, let's talk about some of the history here. This dish goes back to the 1970s, where it's really popular in Italian-American culture. A lot of people also think it started at the Colonial Restaurant in Utica, but that's not confirmed. Either way, this is one of the best regional dishes the states have to offer you. Apple cider vinegar has been a fixture in American homes for centuries, predating refrigeration by a long shot. The process of fermentation was harnessed to create this tangy liquid that could preserve fruits, vegetables, and even meats, all while offering a sharp, zesty flavor to dishes. Early settlers knew its value beyond just culinary uses. Apple cider vinegar was an essential part of their health regimens, believed to help with digestion, fight off infections, and even serve as a general tonic for the body. In fact, it was a multitasker before multitasking was cool. For preservation, apple cider vinegar works through its acidity. High acidity levels inhibit the growth of bacteria, which is why it was commonly used for pickling vegetables and fruits, making it a pantry essential on homesteads. Canning with apple cider vinegar kept food fresh and safe without refrigeration, and as an added bonus, it gave everything a delightful punch. Nutritionally, it's packed with potassium, magnesium, and probiotics from fermentation, which supports gut health. The vinegar's practicality extended beyond the kitchen, too. People used it for cleaning, for medicinal purposes, and even as a natural insect repellent. Born out of necessity, Burgoo is a perfect example of culinary resourcefulness in action. This slow-cooked stew has been a staple of southern and Midwestern America for centuries, often made with whatever vegetables and meats were on hand. Whether it was chicken, beef, pork, or even game meat like venison, Burgoo was a way to stretch what was available into a hearty, filling meal that could feed a crowd. Burgoo's origins are debated, with some tracing it back to Kentucky, while others argue it has roots in the southern Appalachian region. Either way, it quickly became a community dish, often prepared in large batches for gatherings or festivals. The process was simple. Throw everything into a pot, let it simmer for hours, and stir in love and patience. Over time, the dish became a symbol of Southern hospitality, served at barbecues and even political rallies. Some burgoos are so robust that they're considered an unofficial test of a cook's skills. If you can make a great burgoo, you've earned your place in the kitchen. In fact, there are even annual burgoo festivals where folks compete to see who can make the best batch. Chicken bogs are some of the best things you can ever get in South Carolina. They're a classic in the Low Country, and it's one of the best one-pot dishes ever made in the country. This dish makes full use of chicken, rice, and sausage, and you know that any rice-chicken combination is a classic format for comfort food. This uses andouille, which is a type of smoked sausage that's known exclusively for its strong flavor. Then sometimes there are vegetables and chicken thighs in the broth. The big part of the names actually comes from the fact that it's a broth that is really heavy on the slow cooking. The rice also absorbs all of the broth, and this gives it an almost porridge-like texture and consistency, but an extremely rich flavor that you wouldn't find anywhere else. You can find this in North Carolina and Georgia too, and it's one of the most effective meals for big families. That state has always had a high population and a culture of big families, so it makes sense that dishes like these got popular there. Another thing that's really popular is the Hemingway Chicken Bog Festival, which actually does get held every year in Hemingway in South Carolina. As you can probably guess, the theme is exclusively chicken bogs. When early settlers in America wanted to fill their bellies with something hearty and long-lasting, they turned to hominy grits. The process to make them, known as nixtamalization, involved soaking corn in an alkaline solution, usually made from lye or lime, to remove the hulls. This method not only made the corn easier to grind, but also increased its nutritional value by releasing niacin, which was essential for avoiding diseases like pellagra. Hominy grits were a staple in many American households, especially in the South. Their cultural significance can't be overstated. Grits were more than just food. They were comfort, tradition, and a social experience. Whether served with butter, cheese, or gravy, grits were versatile, with the power to turn a simple meal into something memorable. Preserving grits was straightforward. Once ground into a fine meal, they could be stored for months, making them an ideal food for times when fresh produce wasn't available. This made grits a go-to option in the days before refrigeration, especially during long winters or in remote areas. In addition to being easy to store, grits were a rich source of carbohydrates and fiber, providing lasting energy without requiring complicated preparation. Not every breakfast dish makes you stop and ask, "Are we brave enough for this?" Deviled kidneys, a bold and flavorful classic, is one such dish. Originating in 19th century England and embraced by American households with British roots, this recipe turns humble lamb kidneys into a fiery, mustard-laced delicacy served atop crisp toast. The term deviled refers to the liberal use of spicy seasonings like mustard, cayenne pepper, and Worcestershire sauce, which were added to mask the strong, earthy flavor of the kidneys. It was a wake-up call for your taste buds. And for those wondering, yes, kidneys were a practical choice. They were affordable, protein-rich, and readily available during times when wasting any part of the animal was unthinkable. In Victorian times, deviled kidneys became a breakfast staple for the adventurous eater, often paired with tea and a stiff upper lip. Some even considered it the perfect cure for a rough morning after a late-night indulgence. After all, when your breakfast bites back, it's hard to dwell on anything else. Deviled kidneys may not top every modern brunch menu, but they remain a testament to the creativity of cooks who knew how to make the most of what they had: spices, toast, and just a touch of daring. Yep, Scrapple is this meat pudding that's pretty much made out of trimmings, scraps, your typical offal. Then you throw in some pork loaf and cornmeal, and we really start to smell some flavors coming together. It's got a pretty grainy texture and is made entirely out of pork fat, and it's one of the most common things in mid-Atlantic regions. Whether you find yourself in the trenches of New Jersey, surrounded by deli food in Virginia, or whether you can't get a decent meal in Delaware, you can always rely on some budget-friendly diner serving Scrapple. It's actually this European dish that settlers used really popularly throughout the region, especially in Pennsylvania. Did you know that place used to be the #1 spot for German immigrants to go to? It's where the very first German immigrants began to settle down, after all. When times were tough, people had to get creative with their cooking. Corn dodgers, small, dense cornmeal biscuits, were a practical solution for hard times. Made from cornmeal, water, and sometimes a bit of fat, they were a filling, simple food, ideal for pioneers and farmers looking to stretch their rations. Often cooked in a skillet or pot, these little nuggets of cornmeal could keep for days, making them a perfect survival food. The preservation of corn dodgers was easy. They didn't spoil quickly, and because of their dense, hearty nature, they could be eaten over multiple meals. This practicality made them a staple on the frontier, and during the Civil War, especially when fresh bread was hard to come by. Culturally, corn dodgers were part of a larger Southern tradition of corn-based foods, reflecting the region's reliance on corn as a dietary staple. Corn was plentiful and affordable, so it only made sense that it would show up in many forms in Southern kitchens, including the iconic cornbread. Interestingly, corn dodgers were also sometimes served with syrup or gravy, adding a little sweetness or savor to an otherwise plain dish. Certain dishes carry an air of mystery, and Limping Susan is certainly one of them. This Southern classic, a humble yet hearty combination of rice and okra, has been a comfort food for generations. The dish gets its distinct flavor from bacon fat, and the addition of onions brings out its savory richness. Despite its simple ingredients, it's a dish with a lot of heart and a name that raises eyebrows. The origins of Limping Susan are somewhat unclear, but many believe the name refers to the uneven way the okra cooks and softens, giving the dish its limping character. In rural Southern kitchens, where food was often made from whatever was available, this dish would have been a common way to stretch ingredients into a filling meal. Okra, a vegetable that thrives in the warm climate, was often a key ingredient in many Southern dishes, and rice was the perfect companion to soak up the flavors. Interestingly, while it may not be found on many restaurant menus today, Limping Susan still holds a place in the hearts of those who grew up with it. So, the best part about going to South Carolina is easily the Frogmore stew that you can find in the low-country parts of the state. Despite what the name implies, rest assured, there aren't any toads or frogs that will jump out from your bowl of stew. It's just a small little reference to Frogmore. This is a community that you can find in St. Helena Island, located in South Carolina. It's said that this is where the dish first came from, and it's a one-pot boil that's become pretty closely associated with Carolina cuisine. This seafood boil pretty much is made of all the basic ingredients you would imagine modern boils to use. You have your mashed potatoes, corn on the cob, shrimp, vegetables, and spices, and it really is one of those crowd-pleasing dishes I talked about earlier. It's nearly impossible to go wrong with this dish because it's got a lot of variety. If you're sitting with a group of people who aren't the biggest fans of shrimp, you can throw in some cod, some oysters, or crab. Whatever kind of seafood gets the current group going, it can work in Frogmore stew. Since this is entirely a boil, it's also pretty nutritious. This is part of why the dish got so popular, since people living on the Carolina coast would rely on one-pot boils like these, which made use of the catch of the day. For centuries, parched corn was a go-to survival food that could be eaten on the trail, in the fields, or stored for winter. Native Americans were among the first to master the technique of drying corn over a fire, preserving it for long-term use. As they learned to parch the kernels, they made it a staple in their diet. Simple, reliable, and portable. To prepare parched corn, the kernels were heated until they popped and hardened, allowing them to be ground into flour or eaten as a snack. This process of drying and roasting preserved the corn without refrigeration, providing a source of energy and nutrients during lean times. In addition to its practicality, parched corn played a cultural role. It was a food often shared during times of hardship, passed around in communal settings. The dried kernels were durable enough to survive long journeys and harsh conditions, making them an essential part of American frontier diets. Parched corn was once used as a currency of sorts, traded in early American settlements for goods or services. Talk about a snack that truly paid off. Beyond its simple preparation, parched corn was a lifeline during the challenging times, offering nutrients like carbs, fiber, and a bit of protein. Imagine a condiment that combines the savory richness of mushrooms with the tangy zing of fermented flavors. This unique creation, known as mushroom ketchup, was a common pantry during economic crisis. Despite its name, it's not your typical ketchup. Instead, it's a fermented sauce made primarily from mushrooms, salt, and spices, offering a complex, umami-packed addition to many dishes. Mushroom ketchup was prized for its ability to enhance the flavor of both meats and vegetables, and it was often used much like soy sauce or modern-day Worcestershire sauce. In fact, it was a key ingredient in British kitchens long before the popularity of tomato-based ketchup we know today. It was especially favored for its ability to preserve the rich flavors of mushrooms, which weren't always available fresh in the winter months. Interestingly, the process of fermentation used in mushroom ketchup was an early method of food preservation, making it a valuable condiment in times when refrigeration was non-existent. While it's a bit of an acquired taste for some, this tangy, earthy sauce remains a historical testament to the ingenuity of our ancestors in creating flavorful, long-lasting food essentials. As far as names go, this is probably the most insulting one I've ever seen. But nonetheless, a garbage plate is a Rochester classic, and if you're ever in New York, you'd be doing yourself a disservice by not trying it. Yes, you heard me right, a garbage plate. Not following? I wouldn't blame you. If someone told me to eat that, I'd probably think they were making fun of me. In reality, though, a garbage plate is pretty much just this massive, behemoth-sized platter that you can really customize and adjust however you would like. Pasta fan? Throw in some macaroni and homemade fries. Meathead? You can't ever have enough ham, sausages, and chicken. Vegetable addict? Works for everyone. Still, who came up with such a massive display of gluttony? Nick Tahu Hots, which used to be one of the top restaurants in New York in 1918, founded by Nick Tahu, apparently made the dish for the first time. It was his way of giving customers the most bang for their buck and giving them a big meal for an affordable price. Quickly, it became a quintessential part of New York's street food culture and a symbol of the kind of indulgence you'd only find in the streets of New York City. The name itself apparently comes from how it looks, which, well, isn't really flattering. Long before root beer was a soda fountain staple, there was sassafras tea, a beverage made from the roots of the sassafras tree. Early settlers, Native Americans, and pioneers used it as a flavorful drink, but it was also cherished for its medicinal qualities. The roots were steeped to create a fragrant, slightly spicy tea that could be enjoyed hot or cold. Sassafras was easy to preserve too. The roots could be dug up and stored for later use, keeping well throughout the year. A perfect ingredient to gather when fresh herbs were out of season or when the winter cold made sourcing ingredients a challenge. It was the multi-purpose drink of its time, satisfying both the body and the spirit. Historically, sassafras tea was used to treat everything from colds to digestive issues, and even as a mild diuretic. It was a go-to for settlers looking for a home remedy when traditional medicine wasn't easily available. In fact, sassafras was so valued that it was one of the first plants exported from North America to Europe in the 1600s. Sassafras was once used in the original formula for root beer before it was banned by the FDA due to concerns over its saffrole content, a compound thought to be carcinogenic. Some dishes are all about simplicity, and coddled eggs are the perfect example. This soft cooked egg dish is made by gently submerging eggs in hot water, or sometimes using a specialized cup to coddle the egg just below boiling. The result is a delicate, slightly runny egg with a tender white and rich yolk, often served as a luxurious breakfast or a refined addition to a light meal. The term coddling comes from an Old English word meaning to pamper or to treat gently, and this process certainly lives up to the name. Unlike hard boiling, which can leave the yolk dry and chalky, coddling ensures the egg maintains its softness, making it a favorite for those who prefer a gentler approach to cooking eggs. Coddled eggs gained popularity in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in England, where they were served to those in delicate health as an easily digestible option. Over time, they made their way into American kitchens, often paired with toast or as a topping for vegetables. Some even considered them the ultimate comfort food, offering a satisfying blend of rich flavor and velvety texture. Chow-chow is a pretty decent little dip in the southern side of America. Appalachian regions really just can't get enough of the stuff, and they definitely never fell out of the habit of pairing it up with most of their dishes. You could call it a pickled relish, but it's really just this dip made out of a cocktail of different greens and spices. You got your peppers, mustard seeds, cinnamon, and cloves, as well as cabbage, green tomatoes, and onions. It's actually a lot sweeter than you would originally think too, and really crunchy. People would chop the vegetables as finely as they could and mix them with vinegar, sugar, and spices to make this really vibrant brine, which stood out among other flavors at the time during the 20th century. The vegetables were also blanched and then placed in jars. The brine was then poured over them, and this would be sealed in jars so that it could marinate. It sounds simple enough, but it's a bit tricky, and even taking a bit of time away or leaving it in there for just a tad bit too long can mess with the flavors here. Let's stay in the South for a while. It's not all savory and spicy, they even have some great desserts. Centuries before the invention of tortillas, tamales, or even nachos, Native American cultures were already perfecting the art of using corn in ways that made it both more digestible and more durable. The technique used was nixtamalization. By soaking and cooking corn kernels in an alkaline solution, usually lime water, the process released essential nutrients and made corn easier to grind into masa, the base for many beloved dishes. Masa isn't just any dough, it's corn transformed through fermentation, a key to both its preservation and nutritional benefits. Once treated, it could be stored for several days or dried for longer preservation, ensuring a steady food source during the harvest season. This made it the ultimate survival food long before commercial kitchens got their hands on it. Masa represented more than sustenance. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and the deep relationship between people and the land. It was the foundation of countless recipes across North and South America, linking indigenous communities across vast regions. Sometimes the simplest dishes carry the deepest roots. Take hasty pudding, a boiled cornmeal porridge that's as much a part of American history as the Declaration of Independence. It's a dish that dates back to colonial times when frugality and ingenuity ruled the kitchen. Made by simmering cornmeal with water or milk until thickened, it could be served sweet with molasses or savory with salt and butter. What's in a name, you ask? The hasty part is a bit of a misnomer. While it's quicker to make than a full roast dinner, it still requires patience to stir the mixture into its smooth, creamy consistency. But back then, time wasn't measured by TikTok trends. It was measured by hearty meals that filled bellies without emptying wallets. Cornmeal became the star ingredient for this dish after wheat shortages made traditional English pudding impractical. It was cheap, plentiful, and distinctly American, making hasty pudding a symbol of resourcefulness during the nation's early years. The dish was so iconic that it even earned a shout-out in the 18th century song Yankee Doodle, which references hasty pudding as a beloved staple. Divinity candy, for example, is this wonderful nougat that's made out of the simplest ingredients ever and just enough vanilla to make your day. It's light, airy, and pretty flavorful, and it makes a lot of use of a 20th century classic. Corn syrup was something that the country couldn't live without, and that was largely because of how popular it got during the wartime period. Divinity candy is made out of a meringue that has an egg white base, and it involves beating those eggs and mixing them in with the syrup until you get this really glossy mix. After you've gotten the right consistency, and that's really critical here, you just pipe it onto some good wax paper and let it set and cool. It's crunchy since it uses pecans, but every bite really has a lot of sweet and warm flavors to it, which makes the overall experience absolutely amazing. It's the perfect thing to eat after a big barbecue platter or something that really takes your digestive system for a spin. Imagine being out in the wilderness with no fridge, pantry, or cooler, yet needing a meal that can last for months. This is where one of history's most ingenious survival foods comes in, a compact powerhouse of nutrition first created by indigenous peoples and later embraced by explorers and fur traders. This was fuel for long journeys, harsh winters, and uncertain times. Pemmican combines dried meat, usually bison, deer, or elk, with rendered fat and occasionally dried berries for a touch of flavor. The result was a high-calorie, long-lasting, and portable food that could survive the elements better than a modern snack bar. It was so practical that fur traders in the 18th and 19th centuries relied on it as their main sustenance during expeditions. Properly made pemmican could last years without refrigeration. The rendered fat sealed out air, keeping the meat preserved and edible for ages. The word pemmican comes from the Cree word pimikan, meaning fat grease. It may not sound glamorous, but this ingenious food earned its place as one of history's most reliable meals. Minnesota's always a place you associate with big families that like to hold even bigger feasts. Naturally, in such a place, dishes that have a lot of crowd-pleasing abilities take first place. Hot dishes, which are a type of casserole, fit that bill perfectly. For the longest time, hot dishes have been a massive part of the comfort food traditions of America. But that couldn't be truer than it is for Minnesota. Ground beef, pasta, peas, green beans, and corn, and the creamiest and cheesiest sauce you know are the tricks to making a good hot dish. And it's something that Minnesotans just can't seem to replace. A lot of people actually seem to think that this love of a hot dish comes from the struggles Minnesota suffered throughout the post-World War II and Great Depression periods. Back then, it was extremely vital that people prepare dishes that could feed entire families with minimal ingredients. As the name implies, it's also pretty hot, which makes it perfect for the winters and for reheating it. Potlucks and casseroles were always something that was really popular in America, especially in Minnesota, and this casserole is textbook proof of that never-ending trend. Long before sugar was king, nature had already perfected its sweetest invention, honey. And when stored in its original waxy packaging, the honeycomb, it was practically immortal. Archaeologists have even uncovered honey thousands of years old in Egyptian tombs, still safe to eat. The secret lies in the honeycomb itself. Beeswax seals the honey, protecting it from air and moisture. Combined with honey's naturally low water content and antibacterial properties, it creates an environment where bacteria just can't survive, making it nature's edible time capsule. For early Americans, sealed honeycomb was an essential. Colonists, Native Americans, and pioneers used honey for everything from baking to soothing sore throats. It was a rare treat that could last indefinitely, making it invaluable for long winters or journeys. The wax could be chewed like gum, and any leftover wax was sometimes used for candles. And while it didn't require any fancy preparation, sealed honeycomb offered dense calories, trace nutrients, and natural sweetness. Sometimes the most unassuming vegetables are turned into something spectacular, and parsnips are no exception. Grated, mixed into a batter, and fried to golden perfection, parsnip fritters are a delightful twist on traditional fritters often found in kitchens where creativity and thriftiness meet. With their mild, slightly sweet flavor, parsnips provide the perfect base for a savory snack or side dish. While parsnips have been enjoyed since ancient Roman times, they saw a resurgence in popularity during times of scarcity, particularly during the Great Depression, when root vegetables like parsnips were more affordable than other produce. The dish was a way to turn simple, inexpensive ingredients into something flavorful and satisfying. The beauty of parsnip fritters lies in their versatility. While they're commonly served with a sprinkle of salt or a dip in a savory sauce, some cooks even add spices like cinnamon or nutmeg for an unexpected sweetness. Whether enjoyed as a side dish, appetizer, or light snack, parsnip fritters make use of a vegetable that might otherwise be overlooked. Today, they may not be a household name, but these crispy, golden bites continue to remind us that sometimes all it takes is a little batter and some heat to turn a humble vegetable into something extraordinary. During the toughest times in American history, the ability to turn scraps into sustenance was nothing short of a survival skill. Enter the humble yet hearty slumgullion, a stew that thrived on resourcefulness. Born from the need to stretch ingredients, it was often made with whatever was on hand: potatoes, leftover meat, vegetables, and sometimes a dash of seasoning if you were lucky. It was less about following a recipe and more about making do with what you had. The name slumgullion likely originated from 19th century mining camps, where the dish was cobbled together from bits and pieces miners could scavenge. The word itself might have started as slang for something watery or of questionable quality, though anyone who's had a well-made version would argue it's far better than the name suggests. Think of it as the original clean out the fridge meal, but with a lot more soul. It was filling, nutritious, and most importantly, affordable. And if someone complained about what was in it, well, they were promptly reminded that beggars couldn't be choosers. Slumgullion was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of those who faced hardship with a pot, a fire, and a whole lot of grit. A dish born of necessity but remembered for its practicality and heartiness. When survival depended on what you could carry, one food stood out as the ultimate road snack: dried meat. Indigenous peoples of North America perfected the art of making jerky long before it became a gas station staple. Using techniques that were as practical as they were ingenious, they ensured meat could last for weeks or even months without spoiling. The preservation method was simple but effective. Thin strips of meat, often bison, deer, or elk, were cut and dried in the sun or smoked over a fire. The low moisture and high protein content made it lightweight, portable, and perfect for long journeys. Early settlers and traders quickly adopted the practice, turning jerky into a frontier favorite. Jerky's cultural roots run deep, especially among Native American communities, where it was a way to maximize resources. Every part of the animal was used, embodying a respect for nature that modern sustainability movements could learn from. With its dense nutrition and near indestructibility, jerky became a food that could outlast even the toughest trails. It wasn't gourmet, but when you're miles from civilization, chewy beats hungry every time. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.